everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you very much for joining us today from Canada, from the US, from Europe, from the UK, from Africa. Vous êtes beaucoup à vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Je vous rappelle que le Forum de Victoria est un partenariat entre l'Université de Victoria et le Sénat du Canada. The Victoria Forum is a great partnership between the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada. And I would like to thank TELUS and Vancity, which are our founding partners, as well as the Commonwealth Games Federation and Right to Play, who are associated with this specific webinar. I believe in sports diplomacy. I practice it, and all of you joining us today are sports enthusiasts, community, regional, global leaders, coaches, parents, athletes, champions, obviously, and we have many on this panel. But what brings us together today is certainly the power of sports in bridging divides. Vous êtes tous des adeptes, des enthousiastes du sport, des leaders dans vos communautés, des coachs, des parents, des athlètes et certainement aussi des champions, à commencer par notre modératrice aujourd'hui, la sénatrice Petitclerc. Et ce qui nous réunit aujourd'hui, c'est le pouvoir du sport. Alors, sans plus tarder, j'aimerais passer la parole à Chief Ava Hill, ancienne chef des Six Nations of the Grand River. Ava Hill, former chief of the Six Nations of the Grand River. Over to you, and thank you for pulling this great webinar together. Over to you, Ava. Thank you.
Yawa Sebastian and Sego everyone. Joha Jina Youngats. I'm a Ganyangeha Gay Wolf Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River. And I'd like to begin with a quote made by the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2001, when he founded the Office on Sport for Development and Peace. He said that sport has an almost unmatched role to play in promoting understanding, healing wounds, mobilizing support for social causes, and breaking down barriers. My community of the Six Nations of the Grand River, which is located in Southern Ontario, is the largest populated First Nation Indigenous community in Canada. Our people are Haudenosaunee. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to visit with a young man in our community who has developed what is called the Warriors Athletics Park, which recognizes that sport and physical activity is a form of medicine. As I was there, he gave me a copy of his annual report, and which they have produced, and it includes information about the Haudenosaunee story of the peacemaker. In this story, there is a tree of peace, which demonstrates that peace can grow if it is nurtured. It states that much like this tall tree, sport can also provide protection and comfort. Like the great white pine, sport spreads its protective branches to create an environment to gather and unify. Sport also creates roots that rise out of the ground, so people can trace their journey to the source. Additionally, the sacred tale speaks of an eagle that sits atop the tree, serving as an ever-vigilant protector of the peace. Like the eagle atop the tree, youth can use sport as a catalyst in becoming change agents within their communities and their lives. Sports also provides a unifying force in our communities. A good sporting event in many of the Indigenous communities serves to bring the community together to cheer on their home teams with pride. It also teaches our young people many life skills that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives, even if they do not continue in a sports career. It teaches them goal setting, team building, determination, courage, pride. It provides them the opportunity to experience both joy and defeat. It also provides an opportunity for our young people to travel and to make new friendships. This all starts on the ground at the community level, at places like the Warrior Athletics Park, which operates under the 4 pillars of community, education, activity, and nutrition to improve the health and well-being of individuals and communities. Sports also gives hope and inspiration to our young people, especially during the difficult and trying times that we are all going through right now. It is with these principles in mind that the Victoria Forum has entered into a partnership with the Commonwealth Games International Federation. The Commonwealth Games Federation is in the process of creating an international restorative justice charter to address the truth and reconciliation within the entire Commonwealth sport movement. And we are so pleased that our esteemed panelist, Grand Chief Wilton Littlechild, Kevin Frey, the CEO of Right to Play, will be working with David Gruvenberg, the CEO of Commonwealth International Federation, to develop this charter. This charter will consist of 4 declarations developed over subsequent years, with the first declaration related to the mistreatment of Indigenous peoples being launched at the Victoria Forum in 2021. This declaration will address the power of sport as a positive contributor to addressing historical and current issues that the Indigenous peoples have faced in the past and continue to face on a daily basis. This will be done under the following 4 themes: respect, protect, promote, and empower. This declaration will also enhance the theme of the Victoria Forum, which is bridging divides. I will close my remarks with a quote from Nelson Mandela from May 2000. You may recall that Nelson Mandela joined forces with the captain of South Africa's rugby team in an effort to help unite the country. Mr. Mandela said, "Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than government in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all kinds of discrimination." I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Senator Chantal Petitclerc. We are extremely pleased that she has agreed to moderate, and I just want to give an introduction. Senator Petitclerc, who was named to the Senate of Canada in March 2016, is also an internationally renowned athlete. When she was 13 years old, she lost the use of her legs in an accident. She overcame adversity and many obstacles to become a proven leader in the sports world. Her gold medals in the Paralympic Games, the Olympic Games, and the Commonwealth Games, the various awards and accolades she has received, and her appointment as Team Canada's chef de mission for the Rio Paralympic Games are all markers of her success. Senator Petitclerc is an in-demand public speaker, recognized across Canada, and has been the spokesperson for Défis Sportifs Altergo for 17 years and is an ambassador for the Right to Play. The Senator is a companion of the Order of Canada and a Knight of the Order of Quebec. She received the Lou Marsh Trophy for the Canadian Athlete of the Year and was inducted into the Canadian Paralympic Hall of Fame. Senator Petitclerc has also received 4 honorary doctorates and sits on various committees and boards of directors, where she provides her dynamic and unique perspective. We are so pleased to have her serve as the moderator for today's webinar on the power of sports to heal social disruptions. I turn it over to Senator Petitclerc.
Thank you so much. Merci. Merci beaucoup. C'est un énorme plaisir, un grand privilège d'être avec vous aujourd'hui et d'avoir cette opportunité-là de lancer cette conversation. Such an amazing privilege to be here today with you and looking forward to hear everybody. And former Chief Eva Eel, you concluded your remarks with the quote from Nelson Mandela, and I was planning to begin my remarks with the same quote from Nelson Mandela, saying how sport has the power to change the world, because I truly believe that the sport does have the power to change the world, and in the power of sport, I can testify from my personal journey how sport changed my life really after I became paraplegic at the age of 13, and how it gave me courage, confidence, and strength as a person with a disability, and how it had a positive impact on others when I became a Paralympian. So, but really it's no surprise, because when we look through history, it's easy to see how sport has played a major role for youth, for women, for racialized communities, for persons with disabilities. And I guess as we all go through those unprecedented and challenging times, individually and collectively and globally, I strongly think that sport has a very important role to play in healing and in coping with this new normal that we're all trying to define and that we need to adapt to. So what this role will be, how we can help voice the importance of sport during this pandemic, and how we make it a reality is, to me, very, very important. So this is why I'm so excited and looking forward to this conversation and to introduce our true panelists. Alors, sans plus tarder, ça me fait vraiment plaisir de vous introduire nos trois invités qui vont partager leur expertise et leur désir, en fait, avec nous en ce qui a trait au sport. So it is today a pleasure and a privilege to have with us Mr. David Grevenberg, Grand Chief Willie Littlechild, and Dr. Kevin Frey. So first, we will begin by hearing from them some opening remarks, and we will be looking forward to moving with questions and having this conversation. Alors, sans plus tarder, ça me fait plaisir de vous introduire notre premier panéliste. It is a pleasure to have with us David Grevenberg, CBE. He is Chief Executive of the Commonwealth Games Federation, the organization responsible for the Commonwealth Games, Commonwealth Youth Games, and numerous other initiatives. Its vision is to build a peaceful, sustainable, and prosperous community globally by inspiring Commonwealth athletes to drive the impact and ambition of all Commonwealth citizens through sport. David joined the Commonwealth Games Federation after serving as a chief executive of the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games Organizing Committee, where I had the privilege to be chef de mission for Team Canada. So this is where we met, and this is where I was able to see firsthand your expertise and most importantly, I believe, your passion for sport and for inclusion. So thank you very much for being with us, David, Mr. Grevenberg, and it will be a pleasure to hear you for your opening remarks.
Great, thank you so much, Senator Peder, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here with these fellow panelists as well, and I always feel, I would say, warm and cozy in the community of sport. Just to say is that these are, and I swore I wasn't going to use this word, but there is no better word. These are unprecedented times in so many different ways. And I think a challenging humanity to really look inward and look at what is recoverable and what should be reset. I think socially, environmentally, economically, the world is in major flux. The Commonwealth and Commonwealth sport has a very, I would say, deep history, really starting from, colonial history and heritage in our first games in Canada at the Empire Games in Hamilton. But it has evolved and continues to evolve over the past 90 years into a movement for social change. Over the past 10 years, it has accelerated with these conversations with unprecedented speed, to the point that the Federation, comprising of 72 nations and territories representing 1/3 of the world's population, collectively subscribe to using the power of sport to create more peaceful, sustainable, and prosperous communities. And these aren't just great esoteric words. This was using the combined defining pillars of this history of nations, but also the ideals that these nations have really committed to and aspire to achieve, and using the medium of sport, the convening power of sport, and ultimately the social power of sport to heal and drive better society. But the importance aspect of this is that it's not just what happens on the field of play. It's everything that happens in the lead up to and beyond and after. And what we've realized over the past several years is that we absolutely, as a movement, have a responsibility to bring awareness to challenging questions, to challenging issues, to advocate and stand by our principles and our beliefs, whether they are common or uncommon, whether they're popular or unpopular, and ultimately take action. Words are fantastic and words are important, but where those words leave us is most important into creating and being the change that we want to see. So hopefully through these discussions today, I'll be able to share with you some of the models we are using at the Commonwealth Sports Foundation to tackle some very relevant and resonant issues globally on racial equality and other issues facing the world we live in today. And I really look forward to the feedback, both from the panelists and those of you that are watching. And hopefully I can answer your questions, but I also look forward to learning as well. Thank you.
Thanks to you, David. And there is so much to say about our next panelist, Grand Chief Willie Littlechild. So allow me to give you just a glimpse of his many, many achievements. For over 4 decades, he has worked with the United Nations to advocate for Indigenous sport and the global Indigenous rights movement. He also served as a commissioner for Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission and was named Grand Chief of the Confederacy of Treaty Six Nations in 2016. A pioneer, role model, organizer, and advocate for Indigenous sport in Canada, Willie Littlechild has worked with passion for over 5 decades to create new opportunities for Indigenous athletes. Willie was introduced into Canada Sports Hall of Fame in 2018 and continues to promote Indigenous sport as an important component of reconciliation, community building, and enduring expression of cultural identity. So Grand Chief, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and we very much look forward to your words and how you see the role of sport in these times. So please go ahead with your opening remarks. I am afraid we can't hear you. You will need to unmute yourself first. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say nigan gakiok tatam skarnao. Nista nemi tenoman. We had sumoyak. Mstaki goyote. Maikan mote on sigason. Egwa ukmao nastim. Usauke hill and sigason. I just introduced myself in my language. My spirit name is Walking Wolf, and my chief's name is Golden Eagle from the Musqueam Cree Nation. Let me begin by thanking you, moderator, senator, and fellow panelists and hosts for this great honor to be included in this historic event. As my opening remarks, I wanted to take some key words from what Chief Hill began with from the topic description and expand on them from the perspective of the North American Indigenous Games and also the World Indigenous Games, if I may, especially on the power of sport to heal. I was there actually when His Excellency, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan referenced sport for development and peace. For Indigenous peoples, tribes, and nations, development is fundamentally about our right to self-determination. When he talked about healing wounds, these came to life later through the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and its calls to action. And I was going to refer to one of those calls to action in particular because it mentions the Commonwealth Games. Pride for championships, he talked about, to bring forward respect and friendship, reminds us that respect is one of our sacred teachings, and friendship reminds us of our sacred treaties of peace and friendship, which is why in our games, the closing ceremonies always conclude with a cultural peace dance. Then we see sport teaches many life skills. And when we combine this with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, specifically Article 31, which includes sports and traditional games as a cultural manifestation, we're reminded of a very important element of why we play. That is also for spirituality. So we have, for example, a sacred run that we do every 4 years, and then to play to celebrate life. To be a champion is about winning in life. We don't have gold, silver, or bronze medals, but we have in our games a first winner and a second winner. And then while we acknowledge those, we also acknowledge everyone as winning by participating. So the life skills we uplift are discipline, desire, determination, dedication, and to dream. And each of those, we could also say, represents one of the 5 Olympic rings. But we go beyond that in our perspective when we look at the colors that the rings represent. For example, the water, the sun, the sweetgrass, and the fire, which are all held together by Mother Earth and hope. So we look at being a winner in life also from the perspective of balance and hope. And the 4 fundamental elements of success in our ceremony, we're told, are honesty, kindness, sharing, and strength. These are taught to us in our cultural spiritual ceremonies. So for us then, the power of sport and how it heals our Indigenous peoples, tribes, and nations is fundamentally through any social disruption. Finally, the Olympic Games, for which I'm honored to have been an ambassador, along with the World Indigenous Nations Games, the Olympics have a theme to promote peace through the Olympic truce. I think we can expand that through the Commonwealth Games, as we did through the World Indigenous Games. Given the difficult circumstances around the world that have been referenced already, we can actually promote having good relations by adopting a theme to advance reconciliation. The relationships between the Commonwealth countries and the Indigenous peoples have not always been good. So let's improve on that by adopting for the next Commonwealth Games an uplifting theme. And I'm praying, of course, these next games will be in Canada, but the uplifting theme of promoting peace to advance reconciliation. So with that, I say hi, hi, merci beaucoup, gracias, and thank you.
Thank you, Miigwech. And now we can move to our third panelist, Dr. Kevin Frey, CEO of Right to Play. Right to Play, an international nonprofit organization that empowers vulnerable children to overcome the effect of war, poverty, and disease around the world through play. Founded in 2000 by Johan Olaf Koss, Right to Play delivers programs in 15 countries across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and has national offices here in Canada, Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So before joining Right to Play, Kevin spent 15 years in the higher education sector, most recently serving as a managing director at Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Kevin is also an EdTech entrepreneur who is the founder and chairman of teachaway.com, one of the most largest teacher recruitment and certification companies, and a co-founder of schooly.com, an online tutoring platform. So Dr. Frey, welcome, and looking forward to hearing you. So please go ahead.
Okay, bonjour, merci, Miigwech, and thank you, Senator. And thank you to the Victoria Forum for inviting me to participate with such extraordinary and accomplished panelists and to talk about a topic that's very, very close to my heart, the healing power of sport, and particularly in the lives of children and young people facing adversity. You mentioned, Senator, our founder, Johan Olaf Koss, who I think most of the panelists know as well, a really extraordinary gentleman. And I actually thought that given today's topic, and to introduce Right to Play, a quick recounting of our founding story might be appropriate. So in the 1990s, Johan Olaf Koss, who was a 4-time Olympic gold medalist, speed skating champion, visited war-torn Eritrea. In Eritrea, he came face to face with the harsh realities of a country emerging from decades of war. Many of the children that he met had lost friends, they'd lost families in the war. And as he watched the children, and I've heard him tell this story many times, play between burned out tanks, surrounded by images of martyrs from the war, one boy stood out for him. And Johan noticed he was the most popular boy. So he went over and he asked him, he said, "Why are you the most popular boy? I don't understand." And the boy looked at him very matter-of-factly and said, "Well, because I have a long sleeve shirt." And Johan said, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't understand. You're the most popular boy because you have a long sleeve shirt?" And the boy immediately took off his shirt, rolled it into a ball, and showed that his shirt had enough material to create a soccer ball so that the children could play sports in the streets. Inspired by this young boy, Johan decided to establish Right to Play. And using his platform as an Olympic champion, began raising funds and donations. The first thing he did after raising those funds was to load a huge cargo plane. There's images of this, there's an interesting ESPN film about it, and fly straight back to Eritrea with all of this sports equipment. And as he left Norway, the newspaper headline in it said, and remember, this is a national hero in Norway, said, "Koss is bringing soccer balls to starving kids. What an idiot." And as Johan tells the story, he says he'd never been called an idiot, certainly not in public or on the front page of the newspaper before. So when he arrived, he was met by the president of Eritrea, and he started apologizing right away. And he said, "You need food, and I've brought you sports equipment. I've made a massive mistake. I'm so sorry. I'm going to go home." And the president of Eritrea looked at Johan and said, "This is the greatest gift we've received. For the first time, we're being treated like human beings, not just something to be kept alive. For the first time, my children can play like all children." And And I tell you that story because I think it goes to the heart of what we're here to talk about today. That sport and play are fundamental forces in the life of children and youth. And they're especially powerful at times of social disruption, where childhoods are interrupted and cut short by economic crisis, war, conflict, and disease. If you fast forward 20 years from Johan's trip to Eritrea, Right to Play has now protected, educated, and empowered millions of children in over 40 countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. In 2019, we reached 2.3 million children and trained 20,000 teachers and coaches in 15 countries and 72 refugee camps. In addition to Right to Play's global programs, in 2010, we partnered with Moose Cree First Nation and Sandy Lake First Nation to run a small pilot program for children and youth, sports-based program. Based on the success and impact of those programs, they began to expand quickly to other communities. And in 2019, Right to Play partnered with 90 Indigenous communities from East to West Coast to offer regular daily sports programs, as we heard from Grand Chief, that are just so important to these children to develop critical life skills and to help build positive cultural and intergenerational connections. So a final word from me before I wrap up about the power of sport to heal social disruption. I think everybody on this panel knows how powerful sport is, but I want to highlight a few of the most important impact areas that Right to Play has seen over the last 20 years. And the first is sport's power to break down barriers, to break down many different types of barriers, barriers between elders, parents, and youth, barriers between police and youth, barriers between host communities and refugees, ethnicities and tribes that were at war in one country and now find themselves living beside each other in small, crowded refugee camps. Second, sport has the power to develop, as we've heard, critical life skills for children that they need to thrive when facing adversity, to promote physical and mental health, develop grit and resilience, to build healthy coping mechanisms, and to cultivate self-confidence and leadership. And then finally, and we've also heard this as well today, that sports can help children heal. They allow children to be children again, to experience joy, to experience happiness, to create a sense of belonging, friendship, and support. And it brings back hope for the future. There's a lot of research that shows that sports post-crisis can actually return children's level of hope back to pre-crisis levels. It's for that reason that I'm so happy to be here to talk about the power of sport to unite, to heal, and to empower. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for these words and for that story. I have to say, even as an ambassador of Right to Play, like many other athletes, I've never heard it. And, you know, it is a story of the power of sport, but also the story of how one person can make a huge difference if they so decide. So it's powerful at so many levels. And thank you for all our panelists to take the time and to be here. And we do have some questions that we want to hear your answers and your comments and expertise about. I think we're very lucky to have three panelists with such expertise, but also experiences. So let's jump in, and let me ask to begin, how do you believe, and how can the power of sport help promote peace and advance reconciliation? I don't have an order of speaker. I don't know who wants to tackle that question first. Chief Littlechild, do you have some thoughts on how sport can promote peace and hopefully advance reconciliation? Did you want to try to answer first?
Sure, thank you very much. I think that's a very essential question today in our society. First of all, in terms of what is going on around us in areas of conflict, there are several efforts on how to deal with resolution of conflict by promoting peace. But in our country, for example, in particular in Canada, as one model of an example, in a little coffee discussion I had with David in Geneva after a world conference on sports and traditional games, we talked about the Commonwealth itself, the Commonwealth countries, and what's common about those countries. And one of the things that's common about those countries is all of them have indigenous peoples within the country. But the sad commonality also is just about all of them have violated the rights of indigenous peoples in their countries. For example, in Canada. That's why it was important to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to be established in Canada. We went from coast to coast to coast for 6.5 years, listening to almost 7,000 testimonies of what happens to children when you remove them from their parents. And why would you do that? And it was stated in the public apology by the Prime Minister that the purpose of the residential school policy in Canada was to kill the Indian in the child. To kill the Indian in the child. So how do you do that? Well, you punish them. You punish them when they try to speak their language. I was taken when I was 6 years old, and even though the law, by the way, this was a legislated form of assimilation. When I was taken at 6, I didn't know English as a language. So I had to learn that because my grandparents who raised me, my grandfather especially, he couldn't speak or write English, and yet he was a chief. My grandmother, on the other hand, influenced me on the importance of higher education. So between the two of them and their influence on me, exposed me to experiences. Sadly, in many cases, it was about abuse, physical, mental, psychological, spiritual, and worst of all, sexual abuse. That was my life as a child. And in order to run away from that abuse, I ran towards sports. I always acknowledged sport as saving my life. And when I see others around me having walked that path and having experienced that journey as well, there's anger in the communities. There's impoverishment in the communities. But one of the ways that, after looking at what we did for 6.5 years in reflection, what was the common thread that was an experience throughout these 150 plus residential schools in Canada? And by the way, they existed in New Zealand, in Australia, in Russia, in other countries. The common thread was the bond of sports, how you could run to sport as I did, to run away from the abuse. So there's a lot of harm that's been done in the Commonwealth countries. Prime Minister himself acknowledged that when he gave the apology on behalf of Canada to the former students of the residential schools. A lot of harm was done. So how do we heal that harm? How do we promote better relationships between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples. Well, one of the ways, of course, is sport, but the other element of it is to understand what reconciliation means. What does reconciliation mean to you? And I patted one of my fellow schoolmates one time. He said, "Willie, I've been working on reconciliation for 20 years. And I said, "Wow, that's great, Raymond, that's good." But then he said, no. He said, "What I found out was that reconciliation begins with me. Reconciliation starts with me." So when we made those calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 94 calls to action, 5 of them are directed to sport and how the power of sport not only can heal, but can promote and advance reconciliation. Reconciliation to me means having good relations, because that's what I learned through my language, Witaskiwin, which means having good relations. And that's what reconciliation is about. And sport has a critical role to play in that. So it's not only to heal, it's also importantly about promoting peace, but for me, even more importantly, to advance reconciliation, especially in the Commonwealth countries, because that's where most of the violations about Indigenous rights has occurred. So if we can bring these Commonwealth Games together to advance reconciliation, then I think you will see the healing occur, not only among individuals, but also within communities and within provinces and states and within countries. So it's really important that we look at sport not just as a game, but a very important tool to advance reconciliation.
Thank you so much for this thoughtful answer. Mr. Krevenberg, from a different perspective, I know that the Commonwealth Games movement also has some goals when it comes to promoting peace and using sport. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Thank you, Senator. Going to our vision, creating peaceful, sustainable, and prosperous communities. You can't achieve sustainable and prosperous communities unless you achieve peace. And we've been listening. I mean, I think it really starts with not just hearing, but listening to people. And I have spent the past 10 years traveling the Commonwealth, showing my respect, but mostly importantly is listening and learning from people. And really before opening my mouth and trying to contribute. And that's not always easy, but certainly when done, very defining and very enriching. What we've discovered is that peace is the foundation, and we've created an entire impact framework that guides the creation of our host city contracts for games, the policies that we implement, how we communicate, and how we develop our programs, and essentially position the brand of our games and a more modern Commonwealth. Because the Commonwealth means many different things to many different people, both good and bad. You know, it will mean a different thing to a child in the area of Westminster and London than it does to a child in Soweto or Trenchtown. And how we create a movement and a brand that does transcend this really comes down to its ability to positively impact the lives of people. If I go to the premise of peace, and Grand Chief Littlechild has I think, provided a wonderful introduction. We have took it upon ourselves about 5 years ago to define what we felt were the stages of peace building. And it really starts fundamentally with the respect, protection, and promotion of human rights. We have to uphold and recognize people's rights, their human rights, their inalienable rights. And that is the fundamental foundation for everything that we do. It's exercising our duty of care, of respecting and protecting people first and foremost. So whether that's through our games or the impact of our games, or whether that's through our development programs, respecting, protecting, and promoting human rights is at the foundation. It is the bedrock. Only then can you recognize and see marginalization. Whether that's historical marginalization that plays out in today's realities, or whether that's future marginalization based on current decisions. And that is something that that awareness, once you take the human rights lens to your work, you can start to see where people are disenfranchised and start to address that. The third pillar of once you've established that someone is or potentially will be marginalized, it's about addressing the issues, the conflict that is created or is around. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I just noticed that it was frozen. This resolution of conflict and addressing conflict after you recognize that people have these rights, that they are being marginalized, you can start to identify those areas of conflict and start to resolve these issues by convening. And the power of sport allows us to convene and start to address these issues in a very different way, as Nelson Mandela has said so eloquently, and many others after him. And then finally, we have the ability on that fourth tier of peace building to start the journey of truth and reconciliation. And truth and reconciliation is not a destination. And it is something that belongs to all of us. It is a shared reality. And so what we have done is essentially created a framework that allows us to use the power of sport in everything that we do to drive those fundamental steps to peace building, which then we can build the pillars of sustainable development on and contribute to SDG work and actually make communities and people more prosperous in terms of their sense of well-being. But if we do not fundamentally address peace building, we fail before we start. And that is critical in everything. Do we have all the answers? No. But we do have an approach and a lens that allows us, through the hosting of our games and through the hosting of our development programs, to take these steps to contribute. And I think that the work that we're now doing on issues around Indigenous truth and reconciliation, addressing the legacy of slavery, issues around religious sectarianism and post-colonial atrocities, and how we are taking steps to create a meaningful framework of addressing these issues consistently, but more importantly, calling for a global call to action to transform the way we deliver sport so that it truly is inclusive and not exclusive, and that is stylistically and sincerely doing what it said, that we all believe it says on the box, which is to be a force and power for good.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. Dr. Frey, I know Right to Play, and from your experience, I'm sure, have seen so many times on the ground how sport helps when it comes to promoting peace and reconciliation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Absolutely. As I mentioned in some of my opening remarks, last year we worked in 72 different refugee camps around the world. As I think many people on this call are aware, we're currently facing the largest refugee crisis since World War II globally. There's over 70 million people globally right now who have been forced from their homes, 30 million refugees living outside their countries, and the balance, 40 million, are internally displaced. As Ambassador Beaulieu, who introduced us, knows one region of the world extremely well. He just spent a number of years in the Middle East and working on the Syrian refugee crisis. And we do a lot of work there as well. 2 years ago, with the Prime Minister of Holland, I visited one of our programs there. Maybe I'll just give you a bit of a kind of a tangible taste of how this can actually play out on the ground. How can sport actually bring children together, bring communities together? And so we visited a program, and it uses sport. And this program was in Lebanon. In Lebanon, there is a lot of tension. Refugees are not welcome. There's violence, there's bullying, discrimination against Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees. The host communities, by and large, don't want them there. They want them to go home. The children know that. They lack access to jobs for parents, schools for children, and to healthcare. It's a very difficult and conflicted situation for these children to be raised. When these children are at home, they hear from their parents that all the problems in the country are, of course, due to the refugees, or due to the other people who've come to the country, and the children internalize this. But in all of our programs, we bring together these different communities. So we went to a big sports pitch. We had Palestinians, we had Syrians, and we had Lebanese all playing together. And we mix them into teams, and we do this 3 times a week, every week for 2 years. And you actually see the barriers come down. And I remember walking around the pitch, and the children were arm in arm. And as our field facilitator started pointing out, I said, "Oh, that's a Syrian refugee." And I said, "But they have their arm around each other." I said, "Yeah, they've become great friends through this." We did a bunch of measurement and evaluation on the program, and we found out that based on that program, children in that sports-based program were 3 times more likely to have friends from other nationalities, so refugee host community, and they were even more likely to meet with them outside of our program activities. So that social cohesion was starting to happen. The final thing we found is that the children ended up being the leaders and the youth. They then brought back the messages to their parents that everything that you told me about these refugees isn't true. I have a great friend now. His name is Omar, and I want to go play with him on Saturday, actually. So right on the ground, you can see sport bringing people together and then elevating children and youth into leaders who are actually going back to their parents with new messages and different narratives, and contributing to more peaceful and cohesive societies.
Thank you very much for this, for these answers. Thank you. And I want to bring you all back to something that may seem a little more practical and maybe not as ambitious as promoting peace and advancing reconciliation, but something that is very close to my heart these days as a parent, as a mom of a 6-year-old, and has globally, we're all going through this this pandemic, and so I want to hear you on the importance of sport for our kids. We have a great Canadian athlete in Canada who says sport is medicine, and in fact, I also believe that sport is a medicine. And so I'm wondering how you think that sport can help and heal some of the stress and anxiety that we hear during those quarantines and confinement and some lockdown, and especially for the kids. So from your experience, and maybe I will continue with you, Dr. Frey, because I think you've seen it in some of the high stress and high anxiety situation, like you said. So in your opinion and in your experience, so how should our leaders use sport to make sure that we help our kids cope with what everybody's going on right now?
Thank you, Senator. I think that sport, like you said, is extraordinarily powerful, especially in what I will call the recovery phase. So in the response phase, obviously, we all kind of headed into quarantine. There wasn't enough physical activity. We were not connecting socially. There's obviously lots of mental health issues that are starting to come to the forefront now, 3 or 4 months in. But what we're finding, and what we have actually found over the last 20 years of Right to Play's experience, is that sport has a really powerful role to play post-pandemic, post a natural disaster like the tsunami in Thailand, post-civil wars, to actually bring people, once it's safe, back out of their houses, to convene together intergenerationally as well, for children to get physically active so that their hope comes back. I mentioned in my opening remarks that hope is actually lost, and that sport has a power to create hope for children and to bring people back together. In a number of our programs here in Canada, actually, this has been happening just in the last 3 weeks in a number of communities. The first activities that were started once lockdowns were loosened was sports-based for us, so socially distanced volleyball, outdoor volleyball. But it was just a way for kids to be able to get together and connect again, to find that solidarity and support from their friends. I think the last thing I'll say on this is the importance of coaches. I think that's sometimes lost in sport. We just think about sport as the act of playing. But especially when coaches are well-trained, they can be extraordinarily powerful figures in the lives of youth and children, especially when they're struggling with adversity. They can facilitate conversations, they can support, and in some cases, those coaches can refer on to other support when needed if a child or youth is really struggling. So there's a real role, I think, for coaches as well as we move into the recovery phase.
Thank you. Grand Chief Littlechild, you did mention yourself in your opening statements that that sport literally saved your life. And that's a very powerful statement. And I know that sport changed my life. So when you think about sport right now, with everything that our kids are going through, the stress, the anxiety, the uncertainty, what is your perspective on how should we, make sure that sport is an important part of what we do in this country and all countries? I think we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just as you just heard that sport is medicine, for us, from our perspective, similarly, culture is treatment. And of course, in many places, sport is part of culture. And just coincidentally, in our last World Indigenous Games, we had a friendly match, as they say in football or soccer, with some Syrian refugees. So in order to welcome them into our country. And that was quite an exciting event of getting together in itself. But when you talk about the current pandemic situation and what role can sport play, I think I'm going to add a different dimension to the perspectives that have been prominent in our country. At first, many saw the coronavirus, COVID-19, enter our country as a health issue. Many others saw it as an economic issue. For us, it was important that we look at health from a holistic perspective so that we continued our sacred dances, for example. We continued our physical activity through this pandemic. And I have to pay tribute to the members in my community. Yes, we only have 18,000 residents in my community on the reserve. But because we relied on, for example, as we have a sacred run, we also have sacred dances, dances that are very physically active. The sun dance, one of which we just concluded 2 days ago, which is a thanksgiving for being blessed with a healthy body. The spiritual side of the pandemic challenge has not really, I don't think, been stressed enough, so that when we as Indigenous peoples look at health, we look at it holistically. We look at it from a physical, mental, cultural, and spiritual aspects. So when you look at the spiritual and the physical together, and we have our sacred dances and the physical activity that is embedded in that ceremony, the only outcome that can come from that is better health, exercise from the activity, and the prayer as you dance. So I think that the role of sport wrapped under the umbrella of culture has a very, very important role to play when you add dimensions to it, dimensions like the cultural and the physical element, because it's not only health and economics as an issue. So the answer for us was to uplift the challenge as a spiritual challenge as well. So we answer that with our culture because we see it as treatment. And to this day, as I said earlier, we have absolutely 0 cases. We have no case of the virus in our community, because I think we were very strict on ourselves with the lockdown. Yes, we had social distancing. Yes, we had washing. We helped our elders by serving them food. So we followed the World Health Organization guidelines in a sense too, but we added on to that our cultural guidelines. And in that, of course, is included the physical activity and play.
Thank you for this answer. Mr. Grevenberg, I want to hear you on that, but I need to take this opportunity as a former Commonwealth Games athlete, and maybe it's not true the same now, but I remember when I was an athlete, it used to be called the Friendship Games. So, and I think it's important to talk about sport as, you know, for kids, but also the return to competitive sport. How important is that? You know, some people may think it's only about high performance and medal, but when it comes to Commonwealth Games, it's so much more than that. And it's, you know, it's about chasing a dream. It's about reaching your potential. It's about so many things. So maybe a little bit on how you see the importance for kids, but I would love to hear you on how much we should do to make sure that we get back to those inspiring international events at some point.
Well, I think maybe to start off that, you know, obviously the value that sport, and both my fellow panelists have, I think, done an excellent job at really encapsulating the value that sport plays on the individual and particularly the team, and how it, you know, I think with the cultural aspects woven in, is a real driver, catalyst for that sense of identity and belonging. And whether kids are finding that on the field of play, or whether they're finding that through their PS4 or Xbox and esport, there's a yearning for that sense of identity and belonging that sport provides, and it's a wonderful medium platform. And to take a point from Kevin, when coached, guided, and safely supported, can be, you know, transformational in a person's life. That being said, what sport teaches us to do is to harness or control, rather, our anxieties and harness our ambitions, and not allow one or the other to go too out of sync. Because if we focus solely on our anxieties, we can put ourselves into a degree of paralysis. If we focus solely on our ambitions and our passion becomes an obsession, sometimes we can go over the overboard of the cliff or become quite self-centered or narcissistic and not have the resilience that we have. So I think what sport does, when delivered right, when practiced right, when led right, gives us a really wonderful platform to develop life skills in so many ways, which takes me to the importance of aspiration, and in order to be inspiring. And one of the wonderful aspects of the traditional pathways to major sporting events, and, you know, whether you're working through your local event to a regional, state, national event, and then on to international events through the regional world and so forth, that journey and what it teaches a person is critical. Now, I think personally, because sport has been organized through hierarchies for so long, and largely patriarchal hierarchies, I believe that we are at a crossroads, a changing point, where sport is going to become much more organic in terms of how it's delivered for the common good, and that more is being expected of athletes as citizens of the world, as agents of change, as ambassadors for integrity. And I believe all of these aspects, as you're aspiring to become a world champion or greater, that is a critical piece for inspiration. It is a critical piece to our storytelling as communities, to our pride in communities, to to take Grand Chief Littlechild's point on embedding positive role models and culture, and celebrating that culture. It's not just recognizing, but it's also remembering our success. So I really believe the athlete pathway and life cycle of aspiring, inspiring, and then retiring, not that you fall off a cliff, but as yourself, Senator, has done, thrived in your next paradigm, in your next journey, and that sport has been a contributing factor in that. And I think we need to create a more consistent way of ensuring that athletes and that those transitions are not a fall off the cliff moment, that actually it is a natural progression to thriving in life. And I'm not sure that sport has done everything it can do. And I think COVID, and as we start to recover and reset, I think we need to think very hard on what we should recover, but also what we reset, so that sport is more resilient and creates the outcomes that we all wanted to, in terms of being the peace builder, the sustainability maker, and nurture prosperity the way that we know it can for individuals and the collective.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm hoping I'm not going to bring you too much away from your expertise and your organizations, but one of the questions that we have here is about reclaiming spaces, and we've seen it in some countries where after lockdown, it was taken a little bit as almost like as an opportunity to rethink the city, rethink the spaces that we have, and how, and now I'm not talking only about sport, but physical activity and outdoor and environment. And so all of those things that are close to us because we're passionate about sports. So how do you think, do you think that there is space, there is an opportunity as we enter this new normal to rethink and reclaim spaces, and should our leaders be aware of that, and should we make sure that it does happen? I'm not sure who wants to jump in for this one, but I see Dr. Frey, you have a smile, so I'm going to nominate you.
Sure. I think there's a really huge opportunity here for us to think about space differently. We've seen over the last 20 years at Right to Play, the power of actually sport to reclaim spaces. So I was talking about some of the refugee camps in Lebanon, but as many folks will know who visited, they're some of the highest population densities on the planet. And there isn't places for children to play. And in many cases, what we've done is help support the community to build something as simple as a kind of a rudimentary soccer pitch. And in one town in North Lebanon I visited a year ago, we built a soccer pitch on the edge of a Palestinian refugee camp. And all of a sudden, in this extraordinarily dense, really difficult place to live, you can just imagine the electricity wires everywhere, people living really on top of each other. This pitch became the center for the community, and it was a garbage dump before. And all of a sudden, in fact, so the community started to run this space. They were able to charge a small little amount of money for upkeep. They were able to then bring actually the host Lebanese communities from outside started to come to the refugee camp to use this soccer pitch sometimes, pay a little fee to come on. And then there was actually an interface between the refugees and the host community. So that space became the center for the community, and a real badge of pride that the community now owned and operated. And they also made sure that it was available for girls. In some contexts, building a sports pitch can be something that ends up where you have a lot of boys and men playing. But very intentionally making sure that that space was also available for girls transformed the relationships, the community, both with the host community, but then also kind of took that refugee camp to a new place, an open place. And whenever you went there, and I remember you kind of walked through the alleys in the refugee camp, and there was not a lot of happiness, but as you got close to the pitch, you're probably 20 meters away, you just start to hear laughing. You'd hear a ball bounce, you'd hear laughing, you'd hear kids, and you knew you were getting close to that pitch again. It was the happiest part of that community. So I do think that especially as we recover coming out of here, we should be thinking about where we can create safe spaces for people, especially children and youth, to play.
Thank you. Grand Chief Littlechild, do you have comments on how we should use this opportunity and use sport to reclaim spaces?
I think not only is it about reclaiming space, but also creating new space. And when I look at words like joy and laughter and happiness, and how do we bring that back to the community, what is the reverse of that? Well, the reverse of that, of course, is the despair, the sadness, the tears. And to reclaim space, for me, is very serious. It's very, very serious. And I would say that it's a dream, yes, but where we reclaim space and how sport can help is where we see either a green space or frozen water, where there's no racism, there's no discrimination, there's no hatred. And that's the ideal space that I think we need to reclaim and also to recreate if we've lost it. And sport has such a vital role in that dream, I'll call it, because some say it's impossible to eliminate racism. It's impossible to get rid of all discrimination, but we can sure reduce it. And if you're optimistic, it can be eliminated. So I think sport can be used to do it, to do that, to reclaim that space where there's no more, as we say, as I said, about systemic racism or discrimination or worse of all, hatred. I see instead the joy and happiness and laughter that was just talked about. So it's a very, very serious question and needs to be addressed more in depth. As you said, we're not sidetracking here. I think we're really getting into the real value of sport and values, human values, when you bring that question up. So thank you for that.
Thanks to you for the answer. And I will add that it is going to be a fight, and I'm one of the positive. I think we can win that fight, that's for sure, with hard work and with individuals like you three. Mr. Krevenberg, reclaiming spaces.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll speak from a Commonwealth perspective. We have 2/3 of the world's small states and island states. And whether it's, and we also have 1/2 of the top 20 emerging cities in the world within the Commonwealth. And when we start to look at issues around urban sustainability, regeneration, effective use of space is becoming an ever growing challenge. I think what COVID has done was highlight so many things that we've taken, I would say, for granted. And what the trends and the discussions I'm hearing across the Commonwealth right now is about how do we create, in the case of sporting facilities, a sporting facility that is multi-sport, multifunctional, multi-purpose, and multifunctional. And the difference between the three is obviously is having purpose-based that can go between sports, between types of events and functions out of sport, but in times of need or crisis can actually morph itself into space that is functionally appropriate for that time of need. And I think the biggest learning from outside of COVID is that spaces will now need to be more digitally enabled. And the reason is that I think what has clearly come to light is that the gap in digital connectivity at a time of pandemic could mean the difference between socialization or non-socialization, could be the difference between mobilization and non-mobilization within a community. And I think what we're seeing, and this was something that Commonwealth sports ministers addressed in April 2018 at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, that digital connectivity was the #1 priority for the future sustainability and prosperity of many nations. And I think the pandemic has just highlighted that that divide will be a game changer, and that it's no longer a privilege to have a digitally enabled society, but a right. And I think how we respond to that in terms of space planning and the intersection between the digital enablement and physical space is going to be, I think, both the challenge and the opportunity for the public, private, and third sector to really come together. And I think sport is uniquely positioned, both at the grassroots level and community level, to be an enabler and a driver because of its convening power. And I think that's certainly, but it's very diverse. I think the needs of that are facing small states and island states in times of hurricane or typhoon relief, and how you keep your facilities resilient and functional is going to be thought through. But how are they resilient and functional from those hidden typhoons? And you know, there's some amazing parallels from how a community within the Caribbean or Oceania is responding to pandemics and a hurricane. And so I think these elements will start to shape how we plan, mobilize, and prioritize the creation or claiming of space for communities, and how that impacts what will be available, retained, and on offer for sport in the future.
Thank you so much for these answers. It's been enlightening. We do have some people watching and hearing us, and some questions, and we only have 10 minutes left to our webinar together. But I do want to have maybe a few minutes to go over a few of them. So we have Andrea Carey, who's talking about how the sports system, and maybe Mr. Grevenberg, it's a question for you, how it's often structured to systematically eliminate and exclude participants. So how would you approach shifting to systemic inclusion? So it is a very pointy question,
Yeah,
maybe just a
very
few
good
minutes.
question.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Senator. And Andrea, thank you very much for the question. Sport has largely, as have many institutions, governmental and corporate or private sector, have been set up on hierarchies. And hierarchies, by their nature, create survival of the fittest structures and rely on managing up and cascading down. And that there's a natural process of elimination when you start to do that type of work. However, if you subscribe to the belief that a hierarchy is a culture, so cultures are systems, and you start to look at, well, what culture do we want to create in sport and what tools and so forth, I actually think there's a different way of looking at this. And we actually embedded this in our, I think you can still have accountability and control, but still create a more organic model of collaboration. And I think you've seen this in a lot of female-led governments, particularly around the world, in responding to the pandemic, and their success and response has been much more collaborative. And I think that the diversity in thought and how we are organizing, you still need leadership, but you need to, as a leader, you need to know when to follow and when to lead. And there's a wonderful word, and I'm going to throw this out and everyone can look it up. It's called adhocracy. And it's a system, it's the antithesis of bureaucracy. And it is not a hierarchical structure, but it is a type of construct which really works on getting the best individuals to focus on key issues and problems or challenges and opportunities, and focusing, mobilizing them with greater flexibility and really creating a different style of working, which is more around matrix management. And I think looking at some of these ways of thinking may be a way that we can start to create a more inclusive creation of sport and delivery of sport as well.
Thank you very much for this passionate answer. And we are almost running out of time. We have 5 minutes, but I want to make sure that each of you have the time for a final comment on something that is important to you. And so I will have to ask that you make it brief if you can, maybe a minute or so. And so maybe Dr. Frey, you want to begin with something that you want to leave us with. I'm putting you on the spot once again.
I had to look at a couple of those other questions that are in there. So maybe I'll work my final remarks to address some of those questions as well. Some of them are a little bit about kind of elite sport and what about the non-elite athletes. And I think right to play, for the most part, those 2.3 million children we reached last year, none of what we were doing was elite sport per se. It was about grassroots sports. It was about community sport. It was about sport actually for children to be together, to enjoy themselves, to have some structured rules, but to really, it wasn't about ultimate competition. And I guess the thought I'd leave with everybody here is that for me, that kind of sport, sport that's inclusive, Right to Play has a lot of sports games actually, and in places of the world you'd never imagine you could pull this off. You could see we actually changed the rules of sports so that you'll see boys and girls playing together, and we often have disabled athletes playing with girls and boys in the same soccer game with just a little bit of different rules. So creating, if we really want to heal after social disruption, we have to find ways to make sport inclusive, not exclusive, to bring everybody in and to find ways for them to work together. And I think that's when you get the biggest benefits of sport coming out of situations like pandemics. so maybe that's the final thought that I'll leave everybody with, to think about how we can continue to democratize sport and make it truly inclusive for everybody to get all of the amazing benefits that we've heard about so far today.
So Grand Chief Littlechild, maybe a last comment or call to action for us before we leave?
Yes. I like the term systemic inclusion. And I think for us to achieve that, we need to look at our commonalities. What is common about us with each other, and to build on the strengths of those commonalities, and to lift each other up, as we say in our language, "O pinto win." We need to lift each other up, and to leave a message from a 9-year-old boy who, when I asked a similar question, he just simply said to me, "Musho," which means grandpa, "it's time we put our differences aside." And that would be systemic inclusion. Thank you.
Thanks to you. David Grevenberg, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think just a closing comment. First of all, it's been a real pleasure to listen to everyone's interventions today. And, you know, it just reinforces to me the importance of courageous conversations. And what I would really just encourage, and I guess the call to action is there is a universal belief, otherwise we wouldn't all be around this table, in the potential and power of sport. And I think we are faced now with a particular period of both reflection, but also crisis on how the convergence of public, private, and third sector integrate and work together smarter for people. And I guess the calls to action that I would just simply make is that I would say that as we deliver on the new norm, that we remain values-based, people-centered, and impact-focused in our promise to deliver better sport and better opportunities for everyone. And that includes maybe addressing things that we have never talked about, or maybe need to address, as painful and as challenging as some of those things may be. And I think it's time to be brave, it's time to be courageous, and it's time to deliver on the beautiful promise of sport. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much. And on that note, well, thank you for taking the time, for being here with us today, for everything that you have done already, and everything that you continue to do, each in your different part of the world and organization, and all with passion. Thank you. Truly appreciated.
Nous vous invitons à vous inscrire pour les prochaines activités, les prochains webinaires. Le prochain, le 23 juillet, autour du multilatéralisme. On July 23rd, join us for another exciting webinar on trust in multilateralism with Senator Beam, Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, Ambassador Leslie Norton, and Mr. Fabrizio Hochschild, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General. Looking forward to this conversation and to the many more to come. Merci beaucoup de vous être rejoints à nous aujourd'hui et à très bientôt. Have a great day.